cold billionaire, a broken wheelchair, and a stranger covered in grease. What started as a simple walk in the park turned into a life-changing moment no one saw coming. Stay till the end, because what this old mechanic did will leave you speechless, and what the billionaire did after will restore your faith in humanity. Mr. Grant was the kind of man who owned everything: private jets, sprawling estates, companies that stretched across continents. He walked with purpose, spoke in clipped tones, and measured people in terms of their usefulness. But what he didn't own, what no amount of money could buy, was a connection with his only son, Oliver. Oliver was 10, sharp-minded, full of curiosity, and bound to a wheelchair. He was born with a rare condition that left his legs too weak to walk, but his spirit was stronger than most adults Mr. Grant dealt with in boardrooms. Still, his father rarely noticed that. To him, time was currency, and every second had to bring return. Spending it on conversations or laughter, especially with a child who couldn't keep up, felt like a bad investment. On a crisp Saturday morning, Mr. Grant finally agreed to take Oliver for a walk outside the estate, more out of obligation than desire. Their estate bordered a quiet, empty park, rows of trees standing still like polite strangers, and a walking path cleared with precision. Oliver looked around with joy, pointing at squirrels and crinkling leaves, but Mr. Grant barely noticed. His eyes kept returning to his phone, thumbing through emails, checking numbers. Then it happened. With a small jerk and a loud click, Oliver's wheelchair came to a stop. The right wheel tilted awkwardly, then gave out completely. Oliver tried to move, but it wouldn't budge. "It's stuck," he said softly. Mr. Grant sighed, glancing up from his phone as if this was yet another disruption in his schedule. "Just a second," he muttered, and stepped aside to make a call. He tapped his smartwatch, waiting for his assistant to answer. "Send someone. The chair's broken. We're outside the West Park entrance." Oliver sat still, trying not to feel embarrassed as he looked down at the crooked wheel. A group of joggers passed by. A couple glanced, but no one stopped. Cold air stung Oliver's cheeks as he curled his fingers into his lap. Mr. Grant kept pacing in frustration, now arguing with someone over time estimates. That's when someone did stop. A man in worn jeans and a jacket stained with grease walked out from the corner near the small service shed. He was older, maybe in his late 60s, with a scruffy beard and hands that looked like they'd lived 1,000 working days. He paused for a moment, took in the scene, then walked straight toward Oliver. "You all right there, young man?" he asked in a voice that was warm, worn, and real. Oliver looked up and nodded shyly. "It just broke." The man knelt down slowly, examining the wheel like it was a delicate piece of art. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't hesitate. He just acted, with care. "Looks like the axle pins slipped," he murmured, reaching into a small pouch on his belt and pulling out a tool. Hey, stop." Mr. Grant snapped, marching over. "I've already called professionals. They'll be here in 20 minutes. The man didn't flinch. He just glanced up and said calmly, "Sometimes, sir, it's not about the money, it's about the heart." There was no arrogance in his tone, no disrespect, just the truth. Mr. Grant frowned, irritated by the interruption, but something in the man's steady hands and the way Oliver was watching him, so curious, so comfortable, made him stop short of forcing him away. "Name's Joe," the man said to Oliver with a small smile, tightening something under the chair. "Used to fix more than just wheels back in the day." Oliver grinned. "Were you a mechanic?" "Was one. Still am, I guess. Doesn't really leave your bones," Joe replied, tightening the last bolt with a soft click. Mr. Grant crossed his arms, watching this man fix what a team of paid experts couldn't even arrive on time to touch. But it wasn't just the repair. It was the way Joe talked to Oliver, like he mattered, like he was more than a kid in a chair. The wheelchair creaked, then rolled forward smoothly as Oliver pushed it. "It's working," Oliver laughed. Joe nodded, standing up slowly with a slight groan in his knees. "Not perfect, but it'll get you home." Mr. Grant stood silent. Or, Mr. Grant paused, silent. Something unfamiliar stirred in his chest. It wasn't pride. It wasn't gratitude either. Not yet. It was the start of something unfamiliar. something human. Oliver couldn't stop smiling. He moved the wheelchair back and forth, spinning gently on the path like a child given wings for the first time. The cold didn't bother him anymore. His hands stayed on the wheels, testing every inch, every turn. Joe dusted off his palms and stepped back with a quiet satisfaction on his face. "There you go, champ." Mr. Grant cleared his throat. "I appreciate the help," he said stiffly, "but I already had a professional on the way." Joe looked at him and gave a polite nod. "I figured 20 minutes is a long time when your son's sitting in the cold." His words carried no bite, but they stung. It wasn't the cold that bothered him now. It was how Joe had gotten through to Oliver in seconds, in a way he hadn't in years. "I can pay you for the work," Mr. Grant offered, pulling out his wallet. Joe raised his hand. "Don't want money? I was walking past and saw a boy in trouble. That was enough." Mr. Grant paused, confused. Most people wouldn't dare walk past him without expecting something in return. This man refused it without hesitation. It made him feel small, and in a strange way, exposed. Oliver was already looking up at Joe with admiration. "Do you fix cars too?" he asked. Joe chuckled. "I fix anything with wheels. Used to work at a big factory when I was younger. Hands were always greasy. Back then, I thought machines had more sense than people." Oliver laughed. "My dad works with machines too, but like computer machines." Joe turned to Mr. Grant with raised eyebrows. "Figures." There was something so casual, so unfiltered about the way Joe said it. It caught Mr. Grant off guard. He wasn't used to being spoken to like that, not by someone who didn't know his net worth, his reputation, or his title. "Where'd you learn to fix chairs like this?" Mr. Grant asked, more curious than defensive now. Joe's smile faded just a little. "Let's just say I've had practice." Before Mr. Grant could press further, Oliver spoke up. "Dad, can Joe come to our house? We have a garage. He can fix things there too." Mr. Grant hesitated. That wasn't part of the plan. People didn't just come to their estate. Everything was scheduled, secured, filtered through assistants and gates. Joe saw the hesitation and gently rested a hand on Oliver's shoulder. "You've got a kind heart, kid, but I'm just a passerby. Fix the chair, job's done." But Oliver looked disappointed now. The spark in his eyes dimmed slightly, and Mr. Grant noticed. It stung in a way he didn't expect. Then Joe turned to leave. "Wait," Mr. Grant said, louder than he meant to. Joe stopped. "Did you really work at a factory?" Mr. Grant asked. Joe nodded. "Yeah, a long time ago. One of the big ones outside the city." Mr. Grant looked him over, then at Oliver, who was still staring hopefully. Something pulled at him again, something he couldn't explain, a tug in his chest that had nothing to do with logic. "You still live around here?" he asked. "Not far. I fix things for people who don't have much. Helps pass the time. Help me remember." "Remember what?" Joe looked at Oliver, then back at Mr. Grant. "What it's like to care." There was silence. Not the awkward kind, the kind that settles into your skin and stays there. Mr. Grant didn't know what to say. Oliver broke it. "Joe, if you're not busy tomorrow, would you want to show me how to fix stuff?" Joe smiled gently. "Maybe." And just like that, he tipped his cap, turned around, and walked off down the path, hands in his jacket pockets, disappearing between the trees like a man carrying more stories than he was ready to share. Mr. Grant stood there, watching him go, a strange tightness in his chest. And for the first time in a long while, he didn't check his phone. The night came quietly. Mr. Grant sat alone in his study, the fireplace cracking behind him, casting long shadows across the tall walls lined with books he never read. His phone buzzed on the table, lighting up with emails, stock alerts, and reminders for tomorrow's board meeting. He didn't move. Instead, his eyes stayed on a single object, Oliver's wheelchair, now parked in the corner near the window. Joe's work still held, smooth, silent, effortless. But it wasn't the repair that lingered in Mr. Grant's mind. It was Joe's words. "Helps me remember what it's like to care." Something about the way he said it. It didn't feel like a line. It felt like a wound. Mr. Grant leaned back, staring up at the ceiling, and without meaning to, he whispered aloud, Where do I know him from? His mind started to wander. There had been hundreds of employees over the years, thousands maybe, men in hard hats, women in uniforms, names that passed through spreadsheets, terminations, and company-wide memos. But a man like Joe? Why did he feel familiar? The next morning, Oliver was already dressed and waiting near the front door, eyes glued to the driveway. He said, "Maybe, buddy," Mr. Grant said as he walked in, adjusting his tie. Oliver turned to him. But you saw how he smiled. That was a yes smile Mr. Grant wanted to correct him. But deep down, he hoped the kid was right. An hour passed, then two. Just as the disappointment began to settle into Oliver's face, the gate camera lit up. A man stood outside, holding a box of tools and a sandwich in a paper bag. Oliver ran to the screen. "That's him." Mr. Grant walked over slowly, then pressed the intercom. "Joe?" Didn't want to barge in. Joe's voice came through. Figured I'd ask first. The gate opened. Joe entered like he didn't notice the marble floors or the tall columns or the expensive paintings lining the walls. He headed straight to Oliver and ruffled his hair. "Ready, champ?" They went to the garage. Mr. Grant followed, but hung back, watching, listening. Joe handed Oliver a wrench. "Lefty-loosey, righty-tighty," he grinned. Oliver laughed. "You sound like my science teacher." "Well, she must be a genius then." While they tinkered with an old broken tricycle that Oliver hadn't touched in years, Mr. Grant stood near the doorway, arms folded. And then, without realizing it, he asked, "Where did you say you worked again?" Joe didn't look up. Grant Industries, Factory Division, early 2000s. The name dropped like a stone. Mr. Grant's heart sank. That was his company, his father's before him, the division that was shut down after the automation rollout. Hundreds let go, faces he never saw, lives he never thought twice about. You worked for me," Mr. Grant said slowly. Joe finally looked up, meeting his eyes. Briefly, Mr. Grant swallowed. "You were let go?" Joe nodded. "With a group of others. It wasn't personal, just numbers on a sheet, right?" He wasn't accusing. That was the worst part. He was calm, like he had already made peace with it. "But I don't remember you," Mr. Grant admitted. "I wouldn't expect you to," Joe said softly. "You were busy making moves, and I was just a pair of hands." Oliver looked up, confused. "Dad, you knew Joe before?" Mr. Grant hesitated. "I didn't know him, son, but I should have." Joe dusted off his pants and stood. "I didn't come here to open old wounds. I came because your boy reminded me of mine." Mr. Grant's brow furrowed. "You had a son?" Joe's gaze shifted. "Had." The air changed. Oliver went quiet. Joe pulled a folded photo from his jacket and handed it to Oliver. A boy, maybe 8, sat in a chair almost identical to Oliver's. Same smile, same spirit. But something about the background, an old hospital bed, machines behind, made it clear this was a memory, not a future. "What happened?" Oliver asked gently. "Car accident," Joe said, voice cracking just slightly. "Driver was drunk. We were crossing the street. I survived. He didn't." Silence. Even Mr. Grant didn't know how to fill it. "I kept fixing things after that," Joe continued, "because it's the only way I know how to keep going. When I saw your boy struggling, it was like, for 1 second, he was still here." Mr. Grant stepped forward. For the first time in years, there was no corporate mask, no cold posture, no boardroom tone. "I'm sorry," he said, "not just for your loss, but for what I did, for never seeing the people behind the numbers." Joe looked at him, long and hard. Then he nodded once. "Sometimes, sir, it's not about the past. It's about what you do after." And that moment, quiet, raw, and heavy, hung between them like a breath they all held, until Oliver spoke up again. "Joe, can you come back tomorrow too?" Joe smiled. "If your dad lets me." Mr. Grant didn't even blink. "I'd like that." The next morning, something was different. The house didn't feel like a museum anymore. It wasn't quiet in that uncomfortable way it usually was. There was laughter echoing from the garage, real, uncontrolled, joyful laughter. Mr. Grant paused outside the door, coffee in hand, just listening. Inside, Joe was helping Oliver build a custom tool rack for his wheelchair. Pieces of wood were scattered everywhere, along with tools, markers, and a spilled bottle of glue. Oliver had grease on his cheek and a big smile stretching from ear to ear. "Hold that steady. Nope, your hand's shaking because you're laughing again." Joe chuckled. "I can't help it." Oliver grinned. "You keep making those sound effects." Mr. Grant stepped inside, quietly, not wanting to disturb them. But Joe saw him. "Have you ever built anything with your hands, Mr. Grant?" he asked, not mockingly, just curious. Mr. Grant hesitated. "Built companies, built systems." Joe handed him a screwdriver. "Try building a rack for wrenches. It's harder than it looks." And just like that, Mr. Grant sat down beside his son for the first time in years. They worked in silence at first, passing tools, adjusting wood. Oliver gave instructions like a little general, and Joe occasionally corrected them in his usual warm way. But something was shifting inside Mr. Grant. His hands trembled, not from effort, but from unfamiliarity, from shame. He looked at Oliver, really looked at him, his tiny fingers gripping the screwdriver, his narrowed eyes as he concentrated, his smile when something clicked into place. "I missed so much," Mr. Grant whispered, more to himself than anyone else. Joe didn't say anything. He just kept working. Later that evening, when the sun dipped below the trees and the garage was quiet again, Mr. Grant stood by Joe's truck as he packed up. "You didn't have to keep coming back," Mr. Grant said. Joe leaned against the truck. "Didn't feel like I had a choice." There was a pause. Mr. Grant finally said what he'd been carrying for days. "You should hate me. I took your job. I don't even remember your name." Joe looked down, then met his eyes. "I did hate you," he said quietly. "For a while. Not because you fired me, because I thought you didn't even notice. Like I didn't matter." Mr. Grant swallowed. "And now?" Joe shrugged. "Now I see a man trying. That's more than most ever do." There was a long silence. Then Mr. Grant spoke again. "I want to start something," he said. "A foundation. For kids like Oliver. For fathers who lost theirs. I don't want it to be in my name. I want it to be in his." Joe turned slowly. "In my son's?" Mr. Grant nodded. "You reminded me what it means to feel again. You gave me back my boy, even if just for a moment." Joe didn't reply right away. His throat tightened, his eyes shimmered, but he blinked it away. "What would you call it?" he asked. Mr. Grant smiled faintly. "Liam's Light." Joe looked away, swallowing hard. That was his name, Liam. "I know," Mr. Grant said. "Oliver told me." The next week, the papers exploded. Billionaire Funds Foundation, named after former worker's son. From cold executive to compassionate father, what changed Mr. Grant? But the man behind the story didn't care about the headlines. He was too busy being present, learning to push Oliver's wheelchair across the lawn without rushing, helping him draw blueprints for their next wooden project, asking Joe questions instead of giving orders. People around town whispered. Some thought it was PR. Others said it was guilt. But those who saw Mr. Grant with Joe and Oliver, laughing, covered in sawdust, hugging without hesitation, knew better. Something real had changed. And then came the moment that surprised even Mr. Grant. It was late evening. The foundation's first workshop was being set up, and Oliver was giving a tiny speech. Just a few kids and their parents were there, along with some staff. Joe stood in the back, arms folded, smiling. Mr. Grant stood beside Oliver, ready to end the speech. But Oliver looked up and said into the mic, "Dad, want to say something?" The room went silent. Mr. Grant stepped forward, took the mic, and said, "I spent my whole life chasing wealth, until a mechanic taught me what richness really means. No music, no claps, just silence. The kind that stays with people." That winter came early, frost on trees, frozen grass, and cold, heavy air. But inside the new foundation center near Mr. Grant's estate, warmth lived. Kids in wheelchairs laughed and raced. Old factory workers painted murals with them. One wall showed a smiling boy. Under it, Liam's light. Every child deserves a chance to shine. Joe stood looking at the painting. Mr. Grant walked up. "You think he would have liked it?" he asked. Joe smiled. He would have raced Oliver down that hallway. They stood quietly, not as a rich man and worker, but as two men trying to be better. Outside, Oliver played in his wheelchair, trying to catch snowflakes. "Watch out, you'll hit the bush," Joe yelled. "Already did." Oliver laughed. Mr. Grant rushed out with his coat, wrapped it around Oliver. "You think I'll let my favorite engineer freeze?" he joked. Oliver started, then hugged him tight. Not a quick hug, a deep one, filled with years of silence and new love. Joe watched from the window, a tear rolling down. That night, Oliver slept under his dad's coat. Mr. Grant and Joe sat by the fire. "I never asked," Mr. Grant said. "Want an official role here?" Joe shook his head. "I already have one. I'm Liam's dad. That's enough." Mr. Grant nodded. Joe pointed to Oliver. "If we grow, I'll still be here. For him." And in that quiet moment, Mr. Grant felt it. Not guilt, not duty, just peace. He wasn't a billionaire fixing problems. He was a father, rebuilding trust and love. As snow fell outside, inside that home, something else was falling into place. Heart, connection, and a love richer than any fortune. In a world where money often overshadows emotion, this story reminds us that real wealth lies in connection, compassion, and second chances. If this touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that matter. And remember, sometimes it's not about fixing what's broken, but healing what's been forgotten.